Hi, welcome to the show. Today I want to cover how I completely wasted and messed up my 20s. The first mistake that I made was not taking care of my health. To give you insight as to why this is so important, oftentimes you're going to hear that health is wealth and without health you have nothing. And this is something I always mentally knew because all my life I've been largely healthy. Like when I was young, super healthy. When I was in my 20s, super healthy. Like here and there, I might have some issues, like let's say skin issues or like acne, whatever, right? But I never had anything crazy. However, what happened a year ago is I went through a chronic illness that just started out of nowhere. It's still in the process of being diagnosed, so it's been a year and a half of like dealing with symptoms, and there were times where it was literally debilitating. I will not bore you with the entire story. Maybe that'll be a different video, but basically, I thought I had a brain tumor. I had very severe neurological issues to the point that, my coordination was off. A lot of things that I used to do unconsciously or subconsciously, like, let's say grabbing a pen, writing really quickly. There's all the things I used to take for granted with coordination and movement. All that stuff just kind of went to shit overnight. I know what it's like to basically experience what it's like to be healthy and then to actually not be healthy and then be in a space where I sometimes actually currently wonder if I'm ever going to be able to regain my health back to what it used to be. Because even now, even though I look healthy and I don't seem obviously physically or mentally disabled, there are definitely things where I don't feel like I'm normal anymore. And there's a lot more scary stuff. I won't go into it. And the point I'm trying to get to is really take care of your health. I have seen so many videos, and I hate to say this, like with these financial gurus, people that I actually enjoy following on YouTube, where they talk about being frugal, which is a good thing. I'm not saying that's bad, but one part of their frugality they mentioned is like, oh, you don't really need to like pay too much money in terms of getting good food and taking care of your health. Now, I'm not saying they're advocating being healthy, but oftentimes we live in a society where the whole like hustle culture is glorified, especially in the US. That's one thing I found compared to Europe. And I got to tell you, man, like you got to really take care of your health. So if a financial guru is advocating, like, oh, just go to the discount rack at the grocery store, again, I'm not going to discount that. I'm just trying to say, pay attention to the quality of the food that you're eating, get enough rest, and exercise. Like it's very basic, right? But really, like I think for a lot of people in their 20s, and for me, like in my 20s, I felt invincible. I never thought I would have health issues. I never thought I'd be dealing with the hell that I'm going through physically right now. And I would hear from people, like my mom would tell me, like, be careful what you eat. And oftentimes, oddly enough, I was into health. It wasn't like I was eating terribly unhealthy, but stuff still happened. And what I'm trying to say is give yourself the best chance of success in terms of continuing your health. Because in your 20s, chances are you probably take your health for granted. Now, I know if you're going through health issues, you probably know what I'm talking about and you don't take it as much for granted. But for me, I pretty much felt invincible. I felt like, oh, I'm fine. I work out. I eat generally pretty healthy and all this other stuff. But I never thought anything like crazy would happen to me. And that's how most people think, right? They think it's not going to happen to them until it actually does happen to them. So I would say the fundamentals of getting enough sleep, getting enough rest, eating healthy, exercising, definitely make sure you have good habits around that. The other thing I want to really call attention to, and this might seem out of left field and kind of random, but this is just kind of stuff I learned about health from the experiences that I went through. As much as possible, you want to avoid head trauma. Now, I think most of you are like, well, duh, obviously you don't want to like just get head trauma. That doesn't sound pleasant. But for me, in my 20s, I was really into boxing. So I did a lot of sparring. Well, not like a lot, but I did enough sparring to the point I got a few concussions. I also got a concussion around 10 years ago when I was like 22, 23, because I was driving to work and I accidentally like was in a rush and I accidentally like smashed into the car in front of me. And wasn't even at a super high speed. I think it was around 20 to 30 miles per hour. But I also got a concussion from that. And a lot of times with neurological diseases like the ones like the one that I'm going through, which is not diagnosed, head trauma is linked to these issues. Not really a surprise, right? If you damage your brain down the road, like it might actually hurt you in terms of how your brain and body functions. So I would say this is more geared towards people that do sports or hobbies that may have a higher chance of hurting your brain and having head trauma. I can't discourage you from doing those hobbies because if you really do love boxing or if you really do love things that may be high impact, I can't stop you from doing it, but I would just really urge you to consider taking some safety precautions. And if you're actually open to having a different hobby versus something that may give you head trauma or more head trauma, definitely do consider that because I don't want any of you to go through what I'm going through. The other thing I would say is very specific again. Since I've dealt with a lot of skin issues in the past and in current, I used to have a lot of acne. And what would happen is I would go to the doctor and get prescriptions for antibiotics. Now, antibiotics in general are pretty safe, but they also do wipe away all the good bacteria in your gut. Now, this is very debatable, but nowadays, a lot of people do feel that a lot of your immune system is in your gut. So anytime you basically bomb your gut with the antibiotic where it wipes out all the good and bad bacteria, what actually ends up happening is more bad bacteria comes back. So you kind of wipe it clean and then the bacteria comes back. But actually what happens in general is more bad bacteria comes back versus the good bacteria. So now your levels of good versus bad bacteria are imbalanced and that can cause a lot of issues. And again, with a lot of health issues, oftentimes like with skin issues and other stuff, it's linked to your gut health. And I would say, especially in the US, the doctors overprescribe antibiotics. They just hand that shit out like candy. Like if you have skin issues or any sort of like quote infection that actually would naturally clear, or if you just had more natural remedies, it would eventually clear. Doctors kind of hand that out because that's the way they're kind of taught in medical school. For me nowadays, I would only use antibiotics if I absolutely had to. For example, if you got bit by a tick and you might have Lyme disease, or if you have sepsis, or you have an infection that could cause you to lose a limb or destroy your brain, of course, take the antibiotics. I'm not against all antibiotics, but for me, I feel like I definitely use too many antibiotics, and long term that wreaked havoc on my gut health and that wreaked havoc on my immune system. And now I have to deal with this weird health situation that I've been going through. So, in addition to the habits of eating healthy, sleeping well enough, and exercising, I would say definitely be careful. Like, make sure you protect your brain and your head and protect your gut. Because, again, in my 20s, I felt very invincible. I felt like none of the health issues that other people were going through, I would ever go through. But here I am, and I want to just tell you that it's better to prevent things than to try to cure it once you have it. I think there's that saying, an ounce of prevention is worth pounds of cure, and that's absolutely true. Mistake number two that I made was not taking care of my finances. And in terms of not taking care of my finances, there are two main issues in where I really messed up in my 20s. Number one is I did not have a specific financial goal and a plan and structure in place to support that financial goal. And the second thing is I spent too much money wastefully and I got into debt. So let me go with the first one, not having a specific financial goal and a plan and structure in place. There's that saying, I don't know where it comes from, but it says like if you don't have a target to shoot towards, then you'll go nowhere. Now, I know I'm butchering that, but the point being is if you don't know what you want to achieve financially, then you can't set up a plan in place. Usually, because if you want to achieve a goal, usually people will create a plan to achieve that goal. For me, I didn't get paid much out of college, but as time went on, I got promoted, I doubled my salary and all this good stuff. But I still didn't really have a very clear idea on where I want to go in terms of like financial goals, whether it was like to be a homeowner, to become financially free by X date or whatever. And I'm just going to tell you that even though you're in your 20s or maybe you're even in high school or in your college years, like if you don't have a plan and you don't have a direction in which you're going in, this is probably going to shoot yourself in the foot. Now, I'm not saying you need to know exactly what you want financially because oftentimes that will change as you get older and as you accrue more life experience. However, I would say if you have a good idea of what you want to create in your life financially, and I think for a lot of people who would watch a channel like this, it would be financial freedom, being able to really enjoy your life, being able to set your own schedule, being able to work anywhere, stuff like that. That alone is good to know, and you don't even have to be very specific with the numbers. Or I would say if you're specific with the numbers of what you want to achieve financially, that's okay and that's great. And you do not have to say like I need to hold myself to this number. For example, if you say you want to reach 5 million by the time you're 35, you can always change that number to more or less. Like it doesn't have to stay set. But the point being is if you can more clearly define where you want to be financially and by what date and what time, that's a good thing because then you can actually set a plan in place and follow that plan and adjust your goals as you go along. But I will tell you what will absolutely shoot yourself in the foot is if you don't know what you want to do financially or what goals you want to achieve financially, and you have zero plan and structure and you're just hoping and praying for the best, this will absolutely screw you over because I was kind of running the numbers. By the time I was my age, or by the time I'm my age, I could have technically have had at least half a million in the bank based on my age. I'm almost 33, 32 right now. But do I have that amount? No, I don't. Because I really did mess up in terms of number one, not having a financial plan and goal to hit. And I'm looking at people who are my age, my friends, and some of them do have half a mil to a million, if not more, in the bank. And it's because they had really good financial habits, but I know for a fact they also had a very clear financial goal, even from the time they were in college or when they were in their early 20s. So again, your goal, your financial goal, it does not have to be set in stone. You can adjust it. But I guarantee you, if you are directionless and you have zero plan, that is absolutely a recipe for disaster. Because even as I made more money, I was thinking, do I want to buy a home? I didn't really consider that. I didn't even really consider investing too much, so my money just kind of got pissed away to the wind. And now, like, I'm doing a lot of catch up, and it's incredibly painful in terms of knowing I could have done so much better. Which leads to my next point. I pissed away a lot of that money, and how I did that, number one, was by getting in debt. In 2018, I quit my job because after going to Europe, I was just like, I can't work for a boss anymore. I need to be my own boss. So I was very impulsive and I quit my job and I wanted to start my own business because the goal was now I don't regret trying because I think if I didn't try 100% to start my own business, like kind of focus on it fully, I would have regretted it for sure. But I definitely could have done a better job of it. And what happened is in the process, in the 1 or 2 years I spent trying to build this business, I actually got heavily in debt because I was building the business, it wasn't doing too well, and I became even more desperate. So I actually started investing more money into like buying courses and marketing materials to like improve my business sales. And I got more and more desperate to the point that I just started getting even more in debt. Now, common sense will tell you, like, well, if you're in debt, stop putting more money to get yourself into even more debt. But I was very, very desperate. So I kept spending money. I didn't want to go back to a job. And next thing I knew, I was $44,000 in debt. And there are a lot of things I would have done differently with that situation in terms of starting a business and continuing a business. And that is a topic for a different video. But getting into debt, it's a horrible experience because it took me like a year and a half, almost 2 years to pay back that money. I was very lucky because my parents were willing to put down a portion of that 44K to pay off. So they were basically giving me a 0% interest loan. But man, I gotta tell you, that debt, it really hung over my head for the time I was paying it back, and it felt horrible to have to really cut back on spending and to have that, like, debt just hanging over my head because, like, it just felt like I had this weight attached to me that I couldn't get rid of. So getting into debt will definitely screw you over, and I think I forget what the average amount of debt Americans are in. They say, like, the average American is, like, 15, $10,000 in debt. I actually don't know the actual number, but I would say as much as possible, please avoid that. Unless you're, like, going to debt to buy a home and it's, like, good debt and all that stuff, which requires some financial, like, savviness. I would say as much as possible, avoid debt because that thing will just drag you down. It's like running a race is hard enough. So imagine like this is a financial race of like getting to your financial goal. But having debt is being like punted back a few hundred yards and running with a weight attached to you. So I would say avoid debt as much as possible. And the other way I actually kind of shot myself in the foot financially is impulsive spending. By nature, I'm a little bit more impulsive, even though a lot of people say, like, oh, you have a very calm energy. But sometimes with money in my 20s, I was very, very impulsive with spending. So there was something I wanted to buy, like clothes, whether it was food. I think food and clothes and miscellaneous spending, like buying just tools on Amazon Prime, that really was my biggest vice. And even though it may not seem like much in terms of what you're spending in a week, a month, in a year, in a few years, and 10 years aggregated together, it can really, really, really add up. I would dare say I probably spent like 100,000 to $200,000 in those categories. So yeah, it does add up. And I was very impulsive with my money. I spent it recklessly. And I would say, and it's funny because like oftentimes when people think about like reckless spending, they think of someone who's like, buying a new car, like buying new like so hardware technology, like technology items, like new laptops every year, new phones every year. And I wasn't so much like that, but even like being impulsive with spending money on like food and random stuff, like it can really add up. So I would say the fix for this is make sure you have a budget because again, if you don't have a budget for like controlling your spending, if you have money, you're probably going to spend it. It's just human nature. And then next thing you know is it might not seem like much in a year or two, but 10 years down the road, trust me, it really does add up. Okay, the third mistake I made was not being focused. I was always like really ambitious and focused on business, career, and my own personal hobbies and goals. And what would end up happening is I would always spread myself too thin. So I would try to do everything at the same time. And what ended up happening was I would do nothing well. I gotta tell you, like maybe there's some sort of life hack or system out there that will allow someone to achieve multiple goals simultaneously and record speed and all that good stuff, right? I gotta tell you, like I tried a lot of those systems for like productivity and like goal setting, and most of them didn't really work for me. Like I would get really excited, I would like hustle for a few months, but eventually I would burn out and then kind of just like slow down even more compared to just being consistent. So I got to tell you, actually, like the thing that really only worked for me is having a clear intention as to the goal I want to achieve, and number two, being focused on making that intention a reality. I got to tell you, from my experiences, that simple concept of focusing on one goal and being serious about achieving it, that's when the most progress happens. So there you go, like life lessons in like one video. Like you don't need to try to do too much. Like now it might vary. Like it's okay. Like I'm not saying if you take on a hobby, you need to like focus only on that one hobby and never let it go. Like of course, hobbies are more just for fun, right? You are more than happy to take on multiple hobbies and drop a hobby, pick up another hobby. But I gotta tell you, when it comes to goals, focus and consistency is powerful, and having an intention to make something a reality. The fourth mistake I made in my 20s is I stayed in jobs and in situations longer than I should have. To use a job as an example, there were times where 1 year into a job, I knew I had to move into a different job or industry. But I would say in an extra 9 months. And 9 months is very specific. But for whatever reason, in a few jobs, I noticed I would say they're close to 2 years. Like it's always like a year and like 9 months, 8 months, 10 months. And always within a year, I kind of knew if I wanted to continue with the company. And most of the time it was I should go on to a new opportunity, but I stayed because I doubted myself. And I feel like those 9 months, like it's not really too big of a deal in my opinion right now, but 9 months, if that happens a few times, that's a few years of your life. And I gotta tell you, if you're in a situation, whether it's a relationship, a job, or whatever other situation where you know you're supposed to quit and move on, but you're just staying in there because you hope it's gonna change, like, could it change? Maybe, but in my experience, does it really change? Not really. And I definitely wasted a lot of time just like second guessing myself and staying in something I knew wasn't going to work long term. So I just want to tell you if you're in your 20s and you feel this decision like, oh, I need to stay in this or should I stay or go? I would tell you oftentimes it depends on the situation, but chances are you can quit. Like, you don't have to stay in it. And no one's holding you to be obligated to stay in a situation that's not making you happy. The last mistake I made was not going to therapy sooner. I've always been big into personal development. I am all about, confronting my fears and all the scary stuff going on internally. And this is more of an encouragement to say that you don't have to take care of your mental health alone. You have help out there. There are therapists out there. And the thing is, it took me a long time to get into therapy because, years ago, like I think nowadays it's way more acceptable, which I think is great. But back then, even 10 years ago, I kind of felt ashamed that I would need the help of a therapist. And what ended up happening is in my 20s, looking back, if I had to summarize, a lot of what drove my decision making was trying to look good for other people, whether it was for women, whether it was for my friends or just people in general. It was about appearing more impressive. And I feel like that insecurity and that anxiety is what really drove me and put a lot of pressure on myself to succeed or perform in whatever area of my life. And honestly, it was very draining. Like, I just remember my 20s as being a time it was really fun, but there were a lot of times where I just felt very anxious and insecure, and I had to deal with that by myself, like reading books on confidence, on anxiety, and all that stuff. And looking back, I just wish, like, if I could go back in time and just start, I wish I just would have just gone to a therapist, like, right away, because there's no shame in asking, like, for help. Like, everyone needs help. Everyone could use a therapist, even for someone that's emotionally healthy. We're not perfect human beings. We need help emotionally from time to time, or a lot of times, and that's okay. So I really would encourage you, if you feel like your mental health is suffering, or if a poor mental health state is driving a lot of your decision making, such as like really trying to prove yourself to other people, trying to look good, caring too much about what people think, don't hesitate to ask for help because help is there, and you'll thank yourself. Your future self will thank you for it. So there you have it. The 5 mistakes I made in terms of wasting my 20s. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below. If you have any other topic ideas on videos you would want me to make, please leave it down in the comments below, and I would be happy to read them as well as reply to them.